by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's such a, well, it's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what...
The state banquet was meant to be flawless, polished, and protected by centuries of royal discipline. But one quiet movement near the top table changed everything. Camilla attempted to claim the seat long reserved in palace memory for Diana. And Catherine's reaction was immediate, human, and devastating. In a room built to hide emotion, tears broke through the crown's perfect mask. A single chair, just a chair, or the most dangerous symbol inside Buckingham Palace. Because what unfolded that night was not a misunderstanding. It was not a minor breach of protocol. It was a moment where power reached too far and memory fought back. And the question that still lingers like a shadow in those gilded halls is this: who gave permission for that line to even be tested? Everyone saw it, not all at once, but in fragments. A movement, a pause, a shift in the air that felt wrong before it could be explained. Camilla didn't rush. That's what made it more unsettling. She moved with quiet certainty, like someone stepping into a place she believed was finally hers. But this wasn't just any seat. This wasn't about rank or titles or hierarchy. This chair carried Diana. And in that moment, the past didn't stay buried, it stood up. Catherine noticed first. Of course she did. The room may have been filled with dignitaries, officials, and perfectly trained observers, but Catherine saw the meaning before anyone else could process the action. And the second she understood, everything inside her changed. Her composure tightened. Her breath slowed. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. Because this wasn't about furniture. This was about William's mother. About a grief that never truly left. About a memory the palace pretended to manage but never healed. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because why would Camilla step toward that chair unless she believed she could? Think about that. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't accidental. This felt rehearsed, calculated, as if the idea had already been tested somewhere far away from cameras and crowds, somewhere quieter, somewhere safer. Weeks earlier, perhaps, behind closed doors, where dangerous conversations don't echo but they do linger. The room froze, not dramatically, not loudly, but in that terrifying royal way where silence becomes louder than conflict. Aides stopped moving. Protocol officers stiffened. No one intervened. And that silence? It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Everyone knew exactly what was happening, and no one knew how to stop it without making it worse. William saw Catherine before he saw the chair. That's what matters. He saw her reaction, the tears she couldn't contain, and something inside him shifted instantly. His posture changed. His attention sharpened. He stepped closer, not to create a scene, but to protect her from becoming one. But it was too late. The damage had already surfaced, because Catherine's tears didn't just show emotion, they exposed truth. Raw, unfiltered truth the palace had spent decades trying to soften. And Camilla, she stayed there. That's the part no one can ignore. She didn't step back immediately. She didn't retreat. She hovered, close enough to claim, close enough to force a decision. And that hesitation, that moment between stepping forward and stepping away, became the most revealing part of the entire night. Because it showed conflict, not external, internal, pride versus perception, recognition versus restraint. And then Charles noticed. But by the time he did, it wasn't about correcting a seating error. It was about controlling a narrative that was already slipping. Because this wasn't protocol anymore. This was legacy. And legacy doesn't bend quietly. Ask yourself this: why did no one immediately correct it? Why did it take Catherine's visible reaction to trigger awareness? Because somewhere, somehow, this possibility had already been allowed to exist. And that is where the real story begins, not at the banquet table, but long before it. Because whispers had already started. Subtle comments, quiet suggestions that traditions should evolve, that the present should finally reflect itself without being overshadowed by the past. And those words, they sound harmless until you realize what they're trying to replace. Diana wasn't just a memory, she was an emotional anchor. And removing her even symbolically was never going to be neutral. Catherine understood that instantly. That's why she didn't just react, she broke. Not publicly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for the room to feel it. Enough for William to see it. Enough for everything to change. The silence didn't break, it tightened, like a room holding its breath, waiting for anyone to make the next move, knowing that whatever came next would not just settle the moment, it would define it. Camilla's hand lingered near the chair, not gripping it, not fully claiming it, but not releasing it either. And that hesitation, it was louder than a declaration. Because in that split second, the entire room understood this wasn't about where she would sit, it was about whether anyone would dare to stop her. And the longer that pause stretched, the more dangerous it became. Because silence in the palace isn't wasn't empty, its permission waiting to be taken. Catherine stepped forward, and everything shifted. Not dramatically, not with force, but with a quiet certainty that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. Her composure was still there barely, but the emotion underneath had already broken through. She didn't accuse. She didn't escalate. She asked a question, a simple one. Why had that seat been changed? And that question, it wasn't about logistics. It was a challenge wrapped in restraint. Because everyone in that room knew the truth, this seat was never just part of a plan. It was part of a promise. Camilla answered carefully. Controlled, measured, she spoke of protocol, of review, of position. But even as the words left her mouth, they felt hollow. Because protocol can explain placement, but it cannot rewrite meaning. And this chair, it didn't belong to rank, it belonged to memory. A memory that had never been officially erased, only quietly protected. And that's when Catherine's tears fell. Not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that made ignoring them impossible. Because those tears carried something heavier than emotion, they carried accusation without words. They asked the one question no one wanted to answer. When did grief become negotiable? William didn't hesitate this time. He stepped forward, closer than before, his presence no longer just protective, but decisive. His voice remained low, controlled, but there was something new in it, something final. He didn't argue. He didn't debate. He stated it. Some places in this family are not available for reassignment. And just like that, the room shifted again. Because this wasn't a son reacting. This was a future king drawing a line. Charles stood there caught, not between two people, but between two realities. The woman he had chosen and the history he could never undo. He understood the stakes instantly. Supporting Camilla now wouldn't look like leadership, it would look like erasure. And opposing her, that would fracture something far more personal. So he did what monarchs often do in impossible moments. He waited. But waiting only made the silence heavier. Then came the movement that ended it. A senior courtier stepped forward quietly, almost invisibly, and removed the seating card. Just like that. No announcement. No explanation. But the message was unmistakable. The chair would remain empty. And somehow, that emptiness felt louder than any decision that could have filled it. But here's the part they didn't expect. Ending the moment didn't erase it. Because what had already been exposed couldn't be hidden again. Not the tension. Not the truth. Not the realization that someone, somewhere, had already tried to rewrite something sacred. The banquet continued. Of course it did. The monarchy survives by continuing. Glasses were raised. Smiles returned. Conversations resumed. But none of it felt real anymore. Because beneath every polite exchange, there was a question no one dared to speak out loud. How close had they come to letting it happen? Catherine composed herself, but the traces remained. Her eyes, her stillness, the way she held herself just slightly tighter than before, it all told the same story. This wasn't embarrassment. This was hurt. Deep, personal, and impossible to disguise completely. And every person at that table knew they had witnessed something they were never supposed to see. William stayed alert, watchful, his attention never drifting far. Not from Catherine, not from the other side of the table. Because this wasn't over. Not really. Moments like this don't end when the room resets, they linger. They evolve. They wait. Camilla took another seat, not the one she had approached. And that alone said everything. There was no victory in it. No quiet triumph. Only a shift. A retreat that felt less like choice and more like consequence. Because the room had answered her question without ever needing to say it out loud. And Charles, he spoke when required, delivered his remarks, maintained the structure. But even he couldn't fully hide it. That brief hesitation. That almost imperceptible break. Because even the king had seen it, the truth no title could override. The empty chair remained, untouched, unclaimed, and somehow more powerful than anyone sitting in it could have ever been. Because that night didn't prove who held power. It proved what power could never replace. And the most unsettling part, this wasn't the end. It was the moment the palace realized some memories don't fade. They wait.